Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're home. We're back in Melbourne. The tour's over.
A touch foggy at this end now. We're recovering well after nearly 6 weeks on the road. Joe, what's on the agenda?
We're going to give a bit of an update on the Global Dairy Directions Outlook, Steve, that was mailed to subscribers earlier this week. Just some of the major issues we see there moving things. Then, of course, it's the background to GDT event 357, another positive event, and, of course, chart of the week.
Okay. So our outlook, as you said, got mailed earlier this week, and the main points impacting the fundamentals in our analysis are listed here on this table. To get the full synopsis for what it means by region, by product group, we'd encourage you to come and talk to us about looking at our outlook product. But these are really, Joe, here we have the main points to call out. I suppose the most interesting dynamic we see is in Europe with the very strong butterfat market, which in the last month has got stronger as milk supply continued to disappoint, but also the cream market has shortened with the preference given to cheese. So cheese demand holding, so leaving far less in the cream market. So cream prices shot up, butter is followed, and naturally it's a seasonal thing. And one thing we did look at is how the seasonal performance of cream and butter has trended. And this is pretty consistent with a long-term average for that slope. But then you've got things later. I think there's a lot of colour coming later. We talked about this in our UCLA presentation, that the elevated fat out of New Zealand is potentially a risk later when we look at the differential to the European value. That really depends on how the market reacts to the high butterfat prices. And then that growing cheese capacity in the US, which is starting to come on stream. So they're the big movers. We've got a few issues at the bottom there that are interesting. Anything stand out to you, Joe, you want to flag here?
Yeah, look, I think that's the interesting thing. What happens when New Zealand's butter production ramps up in their spring? There was a bit of talk last week around the FTA access that New Zealand has now and whether that's the cure for high prices and New Zealand product coming in. So I think that's probably the most interesting thing that we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, and certainly some of the scenarios in the outlook deal with some of those issues.
They do. Yeah. Okay. So moving into some background for GDT. That strong butterfat market in Europe that we talked about, the increase we've seen there is the last 2 weeks. So we're looking at GDT event to event.
Yep.
Cheese in the US has kind of relaxed a bit later, but you've got a forward curve that's an interesting hill shape there, but a little firmer. That's a bit surprising given some of the signals, but a little bit stronger demand, it seems, in the short term. That might have lifted that.
Yeah, sure.
Skim milk powder in both the NZX New Zealand quarter and the European market has drifted weaker.
Yeah.
Despite the hand-wringing in Europe is we've got low stocks. Why is this not rising? It's still a sad demand side that is keeping that under pressure. So the event. Joe, this is a very action-packed chart.
Yeah, well, it is. I think the description is positive but mixed. So the overall price index was up 1.7%. Again, a strong performance by AMF, that little beauty. I think it's its 19th consecutive event without a fall in prices. Butter price actually went down on average, although the short-term contracts you can see there were quite strong. Skim milk powder pretty positive, particularly given that background, Steve, of the futures markets. It wasn't expected to be as positive as it was. And whole milk powder a little bit mixed again, but again some short-term coverage perhaps there. A little bit of confusion actually in the GDT results. The butter index reading 1.7% increase, but in fact, on average, butter prices fell 1% based on the actual prices achieved.
So where does this level us up in terms of the spot market?
Yeah, well, it's again the butter has just got ahead of, I guess, the European and other benchmarks there, just slightly. Skim milk powder still pretty much aligned despite a pretty strong performance in GDT. And cheddar just a little bit behind, certainly the EU quotes that we're seeing at the moment, Steve.
So demand was across the commodities, it was better than average. These are averages of about 60 events, so there's a large number there. Skimmer powder looked like the weakest here, but had a pretty strong price increase. And so this chart reflects the early round demand ratio, that is the product looking for or the bids sought versus what's available. But skimmer powder did drag on for 18 rounds, and that's led to the strong price gain. But see the butter demand with those low volumes on offer is still dragging it up.
Yeah, and just going back to, we've seen over many, many weeks, Steve, that the SGX skim milk powder futures have been a lot stronger than what the Pulse and GDT events have delivered. This week, exactly the opposite, much lower expectations than the GDT realised. So some interesting dynamics there, Steve, in terms of market expectations and what occurred.
It will be interesting to see what the reaction is to this event. When everything settles and people work through the numbers, that was a standout surprise. And it didn't come from China.
No.
So looking at this, and I promise this is the one regional chart we'll put up. We usually show a few of these. The Chinese volumes really just flickering a bit, and that's quite low in relative to many years. It's probably 3 years since we've seen an event record such a low tonnage purchased last time, and just up a little bit off that. The real colour here is what's happening to the forward fat curves. They both point downwards, but you can look at the difference in this event between where we see the spot around 7.9 down to around 7.1, so about an $800 difference backwardation in the slope. Butter looks similar and got a little worse. I mean, we've seen a higher spot, as you said earlier. Obviously, some people caught out and still coming to the market. The buying was across regions, so it's not just one particular area. The solid volumes come from several out of the product on offer, but that's pushed up short term, lowered the longer term. So really interesting how this plays out.
Yeah, we love this chart, Steve. That premium of AMF is still very much there. Discount a little bit bigger based on those C2 contract prices, which for butter, of course, went up. And then, Steve, the skim milk price comparison.
Yeah, and this is stretched out a bit too. The European forward curve still really strong. A lot of carry there that still reflects that expectation that there's going to be a lift because of the shortage on the supply side. The reality, though, and what's prices being paid is obviously a lot lower when we look at that flat GDT curve.
Yeah.
Butter is interesting now when we look at the comparison going out to November, December. That's widened to be viable for New Zealand exports to go into Europe. So that gets interesting, Joe, with about 32,000 tonnes in play at the low tariffs. That could be quite meaningful later.
Yeah.
We already see the dip in the EEX futures. That might get a little bit more meaningful.
Yeah, very interesting.
Chart of the week, Joe, how do you bring us home?
Look, I am actually bringing us home. This is the start of the season for New Zealand. The New Zealand season runs, of course, from June to May. Not quite at the start of the season for Australia yet, but it is certainly the start of the silly season, as some around the industry like to call it, when milk prices are announced in Australia. So we flagged this a couple of weeks ago. We've got there, Steve, the comparison of the commodity milk value in both Australia and New Zealand. And you can see this time last year, we'd opened up quite a big gap between the commodity milk value of Australian and New Zealand milk. Now that commodity milk value has come very much closer together over the last 12 months. And what's been interesting but not surprising is that the opening prices have also come much closer together. So this is in Australian dollar terms, New Zealand translating to about $7.53 Australian per kilogram milk solids. And Australia, we're sort of sorting through the announcements now, but most of the announcements coming in at between $8 and $8.10 a kilogram milk solids. There may be some upward pressure in Australia, as we've perhaps explained. We have a couple of weeks of cooling off, and in the past we've seen processors really bid up those prices in the weeks leading up to the actual start of the season on the 1st of July, Steve. But will that happen this year is the big question.
Yeah, there's several reasons why not. Still a lot of market uncertainty. Those things we talked about, possible pressure on the cheese market, likely pressure on the fat market later, will certainly bring the commodity value under some pressure as we go out. And there's a little sale of a Fonterra business in this region as well, which they won't be keen to be pushed up on prices if there's competition in trying to package a business for sale. So that'll be, that's a dynamic to think about.
And also there's been a bit of right-sizing going on in the Australian dairy industry just based on where we are in terms of milk production. So, the desperation to secure milk price mightn't be quite there as it has been in previous years, but anything can happen in this next couple of weeks. So we'll watch with interest and let you know.
Okay, that's all from us. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.